A man was dragged through the rain, blood spreading across his torn shirt like a crimson flower. Behind him, a small boy cried out, his voice breaking with desperation. "Father!" The rain fell harder, washing blood into the mud as rough hands pulled the man toward a wooden platform where others waited with chains and ledgers. Josephine Hartwell woke with her hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly. Sweat dampened her nightgown despite the autumn chill that crept through the cabin's poorly sealed windows. It was the third time this week she had dreamed of the man in the rain and the desperate child. Each time, the dream felt more urgent, more real. In the pale moonlight filtering through thin curtains, Josie's gaze fell on Thomas's photograph beside her bed. Her husband's kind eyes seemed to watch her, even from the sepia-toned image taken just months before consumption claimed him. "You're calling me to them again, aren't you?" she whispered, touching the frame with trembling fingers. 6 months a widow, 6 months with child, and here she was in a ramshackle cabin on the outskirts of Millbrook, Missouri, far from the St. Louis society that had turned its back on her after Thomas's controversial teachings about educating the children of freed slaves. Far from everything familiar, except the growing life inside her that kept her tethered to this world. Josie lit the small oil lamp beside her bed and reached for Thomas's Bible. The leather was worn smooth from his hands, the pages marked with his careful notes. She let the book fall open where it would, finding herself at Isaiah chapter 61, a verse Thomas had underlined heavily. "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives." She traced the words with her fingertip, remembering how Thomas would recite this passage when they dreamed of building their school on the frontier. "The captives," he would say, "aren't just those in physical chains, Josie. Sometimes the most binding chains are injustice, ignorance, and fear." The baby kicked, strong and insistent, as if agreeing with its father's memory. Dawn was still hours away. Josie moved to the cabin's single window, kneeling awkwardly with her pregnant body on the rough wooden floor. Outside, the waning moon cast silver light over the small garden she'd managed to coax from the stubborn soil. In the distance, the sleeping town of Millbrook lay quiet, unaware of her vigil. "Thomas," she prayed softly, "if this dream is your way of guiding me, help me understand. Who is this man in the rain? Why does his son's cry pierce my heart? What would you have me do?" As if in answer, the baby kicked again, harder this time, and Josie felt a clarity she hadn't experienced since Thomas's death. Tomorrow was the monthly labor auction in Millbrook, where debtors were sold like cattle to pay what they owed. Something told her, no, everything told her, she needed to be there. Millbrook's town square had transformed for auction day. The usual quiet gave way to a restless energy as townsfolk gathered around the wooden platform erected before the courthouse steps. Men in worn clothing stood in line, eyes downcast, while those with money to spend evaluated them like livestock. Josie pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling conspicuous as one of the few women present. The $5 in her pocket, the last of her savings, seemed to burn against her thigh. She wasn't sure why she'd brought the money or what she was doing here at all, except following the persistent pull of her dreams. "Quite the spectacle, isn't it, Mrs. Hartwell?" Dr. Benjamin Clemens appeared beside her, his medical bag in hand. The elderly physician had been kind to her since her arrival in Millbrook, checking on her pregnancy without charging the fees she couldn't afford. "It seems a cruel custom," Josie replied, watching as a young man was sold to the blacksmith for 3 months of labor to cover a debt of $20. Dr. Clemens's face darkened. "Cruel indeed, though some would call it justice." His voice lowered. "Speaking of justice, I see Silas Hutchkins is here today." Josie followed his gaze to a well-dressed man standing near the front of the crowd. Though she'd never met him, she recognized Millbrook's bank owner from descriptions. Tall and imposing, with cold eyes that seemed to calculate profit from others' misfortunes. "Does he often attend these auctions?" she asked. "Only when someone interesting is being sold," Dr. Clemens replied cryptically. "Ah, I believe our next lot is approaching." The crowd parted as 2 figures were led to the platform, a man and a small boy. The man's face was bruised, his shirt torn and stained with what looked horribly like dried blood. Despite his battered appearance, he walked with a stubborn dignity, one hand protectively guiding the child beside him. Josie's heart stuttered in her chest. The man from her dreams. "Next up, Colt Maddox and Son," announced the auctioneer, former ranch owner, strong back, good with animals, Defaulted on his bank loan after 2 seasons of drought. Starting bid is $50 for 6 months' labor, child included. Colt Maddox stood stoically, staring at some point above the crowd's heads, refusing to meet the evaluating gazes. Beside him, the boy, no more than 7 or 8, clutched something to his chest. A small wooden horse, Josie realized, carved with careful detail. "Who is he?" Josie whispered to Dr. Clemens. Colt Maddox had one of the finest cattle ranches in the county until his wife died last year. Consumption, like your husband, left him with the boy, Noah, I believe, and a mountain of debt. Hutchkins foreclosed on his property 3 months ago. As if hearing his name, Hutchkins stepped forward, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'll start the bidding at $20, he called, his voice carrying across the square. "I could use a man to muck out my stables." Laughter rippled through the crowd. It was a deliberate insult, offering a former landowner such menial work at less than half the starting price. Something fierce and protective ignited in Josie's chest. Without conscious thought, her hand rose into the air. $5, she called, her voice stronger than she expected. The crowd fell silent, turning to stare at the pregnant widow standing alone at the edge of the square. The auctioneer blinked in confusion. "Ma'am, the starting bid is $5 for their freedom," Josie clarified, meeting Colt Maddox's gaze directly for the first time. His eyes widened slightly, blue eyes, she noticed, the color of a summer sky, now clouded with confusion and weariness. Hutchkins laughed, the sound like ice cracking. "Mrs. Hartwell, isn't it? The schoolteacher from St. Louis. This isn't a charity auction. These men have debts to society." $5, Josie repeated, holding out the money. "It's all I have, but unlike you, Mr. Hutchkins, I don't intend to own them. I intend to free them." A murmur ran through the crowd. The auctioneer looked uncertainly between Josie and Hutchkins, clearly torn between protocol and the growing tension. On the platform, the boy, Noah, finally looked directly at Josie. His eyes, so like his father's but filled with a child's innocent hope, seemed to pierce straight through her. He whispered something to the wooden horse in his hands, then nudged his father. Colt Maddox looked down at his son, then back at Josie, his expression unreadable. Hutchkins stepped closer to Josie, lowering his voice. "You're making a spectacle of yourself, Mrs. Hartwell. A woman in your condition, alone, with no means of support. Do you really want to draw such attention?" The threat was veiled but unmistakable. Josie lifted her chin. "I believe this is a public auction, Mr. Hutchkins. Anyone may bid as they see fit." For a moment, the banker's composure slipped, revealing something ugly beneath. Then he smiled tightly and stepped back. "By all means, then, $5 for the famous Colt Maddox and his mute son." Going once, the auctioneer called. No one else bid. Whether out of respect for Josie's gesture or simple disinterest, the crowd remained silent. Going twice. "Sold to Mrs. Hartwell for $5. As the auctioneer took her money, the last of her savings, Josie felt a strange sense of rightness mingled with terror. What had she done? How would she feed 2 more mouths when she could barely manage to feed herself? Yet, when Colt and Noah were brought down from the platform and the boy looked up at her with the first flicker of hope she'd seen in his eyes, Josie knew she'd do it all again without hesitation. "Ma'am," Colt Maddox said, his voice rough, as if rarely used. "I don't know what your intentions are, but I thank you for the kindness you've shown my boy." Up close, she could see the signs of a recent beating. The split lip, the bruise darkening his left cheekbone, the careful way he held himself to protect injured ribs. Someone had made an example of him. "I have a small cabin with a barn," Josie said simply. "It's not much, but you're welcome to stay until you find your feet again." Noah tugged at his father's sleeve, still clutching the wooden horse. When Colt bent down, the boy whispered something in his ear. "My son wants to know if you're an angel." Colt translated, a hint of embarrassment in his voice. Josie smiled, touching her rounded belly. "Just someone who knows what it's like to lose everything." As they left the town square, she felt Hutchkins's cold gaze following them. Whatever she'd done today had made an enemy, one with far more power and influence than a pregnant widow could safely challenge. Yet the weight of Thomas's Bible in her pocket reminded her that sometimes the greatest acts of faith began with the smallest gestures of defiance. The walk to Josie's cabin took nearly an hour, made longer by Colt's injuries and her own awkward gait. Noah walked between them, occasionally whispering to his wooden horse but never speaking directly to either adult. The autumn afternoon was drawing to a close when they finally reached the small clearing where Josie's cabin stood. "It's not much," she said apologetically, watching Colt take in the sagging porch, the patched roof, and the small garden plot where late vegetables struggled against the approaching frost. "It's a roof and walls," Colt replied simply. "We've had less these past weeks." Noah broke away from them, approaching the cabin with cautious curiosity. He paused at a wild rose bush beside the steps, touching a late-blooming flower with gentle fingers. "He remembers his mother's roses," Colt explained softly. "Sarah planted a garden like yours, though she had a way with flowers I never understood." "The barn is small but dry," Josie said, pointing to the weathered structure at the edge of the clearing. "There's clean straw for bedding. I have some of my husband's clothes that might fit you." She led them inside the cabin, one main room with a small sleeping alcove partitioned by a faded curtain. A cast-iron stove provided heat and cooking space, with a table and 2 chairs beside the single window. Books were stacked everywhere, on shelves, on the floor, under the bed. "You're a reader," Colt observed, his tone suggesting approval. "Thomas, my husband, was studying law before he died. I kept his books. I'm not sure why." Josie moved to the stove, stoking the banked coals. "You must be hungry." "I don't have much, but there's bean soup and cornbread from yesterday." While she prepared the simple meal, Colt helped Noah settle at the table, murmuring quiet reassurances. The boy set his wooden horse beside his plate, positioning it carefully so it seemed to watch over him. "Your son's horse is beautifully made," Josie commented, serving the soup. "Sarah carved it for him," Colt said. "She had a gift for seeing what was hidden in a piece of wood." They ate in silence for a while, the weight of recent events settling around them. Noah ate hungrily but neatly, occasionally breaking off bits of cornbread to place before his wooden horse as if feeding it, too. "Why did you do it?" Colt asked abruptly, setting down his spoon. "Buy our contracts. You don't know us. You can't afford it." The directness of the question didn't offend Josie. After months of solitude, there was something refreshing about his simple honesty. "I dreamed about you," she admitted, then flushed at how it sounded. "Both of you. For 3 nights, I saw you in the rain, being dragged somewhere. I heard Noah calling for you." Colt's expression shifted from skepticism to confusion. "That was 2 days ago. Hutchinson's men came for us at dawn. It was raining. I can't explain it," Josie said. "Thomas always said there were more things in heaven and earth than we could understand. Perhaps he's still watching over me, guiding me." Noah looked up suddenly, his gaze intense. He whispered something to his horse, then pushed it a few inches toward Josie. "He wants you to hold it," Colt translated, surprise evident in his voice. "He doesn't let anyone touch it, usually." Josie carefully picked up the wooden horse. It was smooth from countless hours of handling, the craftsmanship remarkable in its detail. As she turned it over, she felt a strange sense of connection. To Noah, to the mother who had carved it, to something larger than herself. "Thank you, Noah," she said, meeting the boy's eyes. "It's beautiful." Noah nodded solemnly, then reached out hesitantly toward Josie's rounded belly. He looked at her questioningly. "Yes, you may," Josie said, understanding his silent request. When Noah's small hand rested on her belly, the baby kicked strongly, as if in greeting. Noah's eyes widened, and for the first time, Josie saw a smile flicker across his face. "Strong baby," he whispered, so softly she almost missed it. The simple moment of connection brought unexpected tears to Josie's eyes. After months of loneliness, of carrying her grief and her child with no one to share either burden, the gentle touch of a child's hand felt like a benediction. The next morning, Josie woke to the unfamiliar sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Colt on her roof, methodically replacing broken shingles. Noah sat in the garden, carefully weeding around the late cabbages, the wooden horse watching from a nearby stone. "You don't need to do that," Josie called up to Colt. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow despite the morning chill. "Roof won't fix itself before winter," he replied simply. "Found the tools in your barn." "Thomas was always meaning to repair it," Josie said, feeling a pang at the memory of her husband's unfulfilled plans. "He wasn't particularly handy with tools." "School teacher, you said." "Yes, we both were. We had dreams of building a school out here on the frontier. A place where any child could learn, regardless of circumstances." She touched her belly. "This little one changed our plans. And then, Thomas got sick." Noah appeared at her side, silently offering a small bouquet of the last wildflowers from the edge of the garden. The simple kindness brought fresh tears to Josie's eyes. "Thank you, Noah," she said, accepting the flowers. "They're beautiful." The boy nodded, then returned to his weeding, pausing occasionally to whisper to his wooden horse. "He doesn't speak much," Colt said, climbing down from the roof. "Not since Sarah died. The horse is the only one he talks to regularly." "Grief affects us all differently," Josie replied. "After Thomas died, I couldn't stop talking. To him, to God, to myself, as if words could somehow fill the empty space." Colt's eyes softened with understanding. "Sarah took her words with her. The house got so quiet afterward. Sometimes I talk just to hear a human voice, even if it was only my own." The shared experience of loss created a bridge between them, tentative but real. Josie found herself telling Colt about Thomas, about their dreams for the school, about the hostility they'd faced in St. Louis when they'd advocated for educating the children of freed slaves alongside whites. "That's why we came west," she explained as they shared a simple lunch of apples and bread. "Thomas believed the frontier needed teachers even more than the city did. We had just enough saved to buy land for the school. When life had other plans." Colt finished for her. Noah, who had been sitting quietly with his wooden horse, suddenly looked up at the road leading to the cabin. His expression changed from contentment to alarm. "Someone's coming," Colt said, following his son's gaze. "A rider." Josie felt a flutter of anxiety as she recognized the approaching horseman. "It's Hutchkins." Colt immediately moved to stand between Josie and the road, his posture protective despite his still healing injuries. Noah slipped behind his father, clutching his wooden horse tightly. Silas Hutchkins rode into the clearing on a gleaming black stallion that probably cost more than Josie's entire cabin. He was immaculately dressed in a tailored suit and polished boots, every inch the successful businessman. Only his eyes betrayed something colder, more calculating. "Mrs. Hartwell," he called, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "I thought I should check on you after yesterday's impulsive purchase." "Mr. Hutchkins," Josie acknowledged, stepping forward to stand beside Colt. "As you can see, we're managing quite well." Hutchkins dismounted, his gaze sweeping critically over the small homestead. "Indeed, I see Maddox is already making himself useful. Quite the handyman, aren't you?" "Maddox, though your skills clearly didn't extend to managing your finances." Colt's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "I've come to make you an offer, Mrs. Hartwell," Hutchkins continued smoothly. "I realize you acted out of Christian charity yesterday, but practicality must eventually assert itself. You're a woman alone, with child, living on the edge of poverty. Taking on 2 more mouths to feed is simply unsustainable." "What offer?" Josie asked, though she suspected she already knew. "I'll buy their contracts from you. $50, 10 times what you paid. A generous profit for a day's investment." The amount was substantial, enough to see Josie through the winter months and possibly until after the baby was born. The practical part of her recognized the sense in it, but then she felt Noah press against her skirts, his small body trembling slightly. The wooden horse in his hand seemed to watch her, waiting for her decision. "That's very generous, Mr. Hutchkins," Josie said carefully, "but I'm afraid I must decline. Mr. Maddox and his son are not for sale." Something dangerous flashed in Hutchkins's eyes before his smooth facade returned. "Mrs. Hartwell, Christian charity is commendable, but foolishness is not. A woman in your condition should be focused on practical matters." "Where I come from, Mr. Hutchkins," Josie replied, drawing on a strength she hadn't known she possessed. "We were taught that faith, hope, and love matter more than practicality." "What do you believe in?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. For a moment, the mask slipped again, revealing something ugly beneath the polished exterior. "I believe in the natural order of things, Mrs. Hartwell. Those who work hard and make wise decisions prosper. Those who don't," he gestured dismissively toward Colt, "end up where they deserve to be. Is that what happened to Judge Franklin?" Noah's small voice was so unexpected that all 3 adults turned to stare at him. "Did he deserve what happened to him?" Hutchkins's face drained of color. "What did you say, boy?" Noah shrank back against Josie, clearly regretting having spoken. Colt moved protectively closer to his son. "Children and their imaginations," Hutchkins said after a moment, his composure returning, though his eyes remained cold. "Well, I've made my offer. Should you reconsider, you know where to find me." He mounted his horse, then paused, looking down at them. "A word of advice, Mrs. Hartwell. Millbrook is a small town with a long memory. Associating with certain people can make life difficult for newcomers, especially those in vulnerable circumstances. With that parting threat, he rode away, leaving an uneasy silence in his wake. "Who is Judge Franklin?" Josie asked once Hutchins was out of sight. "Circuit judge who died last year," Colt replied, his expression troubled. "They said it was an accident. His horse spooked, threw him into a ravine. But Noah's never mentioned him before. He knelt before his son. Noah, why did you ask Mr. Hutchins about the judge?" Noah clutched his wooden horse tighter, shaking his head. "It's all right," Josie said gently. "You're safe here." The boy looked up at her, his eyes filled with a knowledge too heavy for his years. "Horse told me," he whispered. "Mama says the bad man hurt the judge." Colt and Josie exchanged concerned glances. Was this simply a child's fantasy born of trauma? Or something more? "Noah," Colt said carefully, "when does Mama talk to you?" "Through horse," Noah replied, as if it were obvious. "She carved her voice into him. She says we need to help the baby lady. She says the bad man will try to hurt her, too." A chill ran down Josie's spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air. She'd attributed her dreams to Thomas's guidance. But what if Sarah Maddox was also reaching across the veil, trying to protect those she'd left behind? "I think," Josie said slowly, "we all need to be very careful from now on." The encounter with Hutchins left them both unsettled, a new weariness tempering their growing ease with each other. That evening, after Noah had fallen asleep in the barn's loft, Colt helped Josie clean up after their simple dinner. "I should leave," Colt said abruptly, setting down the plate he was drying. "Take Noah and move on. Hutchins won't stop at threats, and you're already in a vulnerable position." "And go where?" Josie asked. "With what resources? Winter's coming, and you're still healing." "I've faced worse odds," Colt insisted, though the shadows under his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. "I won't bring danger to your door after you've shown us such kindness." Josie crossed to her sleeping alcove and returned with Thomas's Bible. "Did you ever read this?" she asked, opening it to a marked page. "I'm familiar with the good book, though I'll admit my faith has been tested these past years." Isaiah chapter 41 verse 10, Josie read, her voice soft but steady. "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." She looked up at Colt. Thomas believed that God rarely calls us to safe paths, but always promises to walk beside us on the dangerous ones. "With respect to your husband's faith, Mrs. Hartwell," Josie, she corrected. "If we're going to face danger together, we should at least use each other's names." A reluctant smile touched Colt's lips. "Josie, then, my point remains. Hutchins is powerful in this town. He owns the bank, has the sheriff in his pocket, and isn't above using violence to get what he wants." He gestured to his still healing face. "This wasn't the first beating his men gave me, just the most public. All the more reason not to face him alone," Josie argued. "There's strength in numbers, even small ones." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door, unusual at this hour, especially given the cabin's isolated location. Colt immediately tensed, moving to position himself between Josie and the door. "Who's there?" he called. "Dr. Clemens," came the reply. "I've brought some things for Mrs. Hartwell." Josie nodded, and Colt opened the door to reveal the elderly physician, his arms full of packages. "Doctor, this is unexpected," Josie said, ushering him inside. "Forgive the late hour," Dr. Clemens replied, setting his burdens on the table. "I thought it best to come after dark." Fewer curious eyes. The packages contained food, cured ham, cheese, fresh bread, and dried fruit, along with warm blankets and a small bottle of medicine. "For your cough," the doctor explained, handing Josie the bottle. "The damp weather isn't good for your condition." His real reason for coming, however, soon became clear. "I heard about Hutchins's visit today," he said, accepting a cup of tea. "Word travels fast in Millbrook. He offered to buy our contracts," Josie explained. "I declined." Dr. Clemens nodded gravely. "I expected as much. That's why I'm here. You should know what you're facing." He turned to Colt. "Maddox isn't the first rancher Hutchins has ruined. There have been at least 8 others in the past 2 years." 8? Colt looked shocked. "I knew about the Washingtons and the Martinez family. But the Keens, the Olsons, the Pattersons, the Rileys, and the Blackwood sisters," Dr. Clemens enumerated. "All solid, hard-working families, all suddenly unable to meet their payments after unexpected adjustments to their loans. The same thing happened to us. Josie felt a chill of recognition. His loan amount was doubled, and payments he made weren't credited. I suspected as much, Dr. Clemens said. But there's more. Martha Keene, Henry's wife, has been cleaning at the bank to work off their debt. She's found evidence that Hutchins isn't just stealing land for his own enrichment. He's acquiring specific properties for the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. The implications were staggering. The railroad is coming through Millbrook? Colt asked. Not just through. They're planning a major junction and depot. The land values will increase tenfold once it's announced publicly. But that's not the worst of it. The doctor hesitated. Martha found a survey map in Hutchins's office. Your property, and several others he's foreclosed on, sit above what appears to be a substantial gold deposit. Gold? Colt looked stunned. That's impossible. We've worked that land for generations. There's no gold, not surface gold, the doctor clarified. Deep veins that would require industrial mining. The railroad needs the land for tracks. Hutchins's silent partners need it for mining rights. So Hutchins forecloses on properties, acquires them for pennies on the dollar, then sells them to the railroad and mining interests for a massive profit. Josie pieced together. Precisely. And anyone who might interfere with this plan ends up like Judge Franklin, Colt finished grimly. Dr. Clemens looked startled. How do you know about Franklin? Noah mentioned him today, Josie explained. He said something about Hutchins hurting the judge. The doctor's face paled. The boy knows? How could he possibly? He says his mother tells him things, Colt said. His voice strained. Through the wooden horse she carved for him. Under normal circumstances, such a claim might have sounded like fantasy. But in the quiet cabin with night pressing against the windows, none of them were willing to dismiss it entirely. Franklin was investigating irregularities at the bank before his death, Dr. Clemens said quietly. The day before his accident, he requested access to Hutchins's ledgers. The implications hung in the air, too terrible to voice. What do we do now? Josie asked, breaking the heavy silence. We gather evidence, Dr. Clemens replied. Martha isn't the only one watching Hutchins. There are others in town who've lost faith in his benevolent facade. Deputy Wilson, for one. He's been troubled by some of the orders he's been given. There's a group of families who meet in secret. They call themselves the Quilting Circle, a cover for sharing information. They'll be at the church social on Sunday. You need to make contact with Martha Keene. After the doctor left, the simple act of charity that had brought them together now seemed like the first step on a much longer and more dangerous path. Sunday morning dawned clear and crisp. Josie dressed carefully in her one good dress, a navy blue wool that now strained across her pregnant belly. She had borrowed a neighbor's cart for the journey, both to spare herself the long walk and to maintain appearances. Millbrook's First Methodist Church stood on a small hill, its white clapboard siding a beacon of normalcy in increasingly uncertain times. Reverend Samuel Hayes, a silver-haired man with kind eyes, greeted them at the steps. Mrs. Hartwell, how lovely to see you, he said, with particular emphasis that suggested he was well aware of the town's undercurrents. I believe you'll find many friendly faces here today. His meaningful glance toward a group of women setting up tables for the after-service social confirmed Josie's suspicion that the Reverend was among those quietly opposing Hutchins. As they entered, Noah tensed, pressing against Josie's side. Following his gaze, she saw Silas Hutchins seated in the front pew beside Sheriff Morrison, a burly man whose badge gleamed in the light streaming through the stained glass windows. They found seats near the back, and Josie noticed a thin, careworn woman across the aisle watching them intently, a small leather bag tucked beside her hymn book. Medicine lady, Noah whispered, nudging Josie. Martha Keene gave them a barely perceptible nod before returning her attention to the front. The sermon that morning was a meditation on Exodus and the liberation of an oppressed people from a powerful tyrant. Though the Reverend never once glanced in Hutchins's direction, the banker's shoulders grew visibly tenser as the sermon progressed. As the congregation filed out, Martha Keene maneuvered to walk beside Josie. The Quilting Circle is meeting in the church basement after the social, she said quietly. We'd be honored if you'd join us. We're working on a special project that might interest you. I'd be delighted, Josie replied, understanding the coded invitation. Perfect stitches aren't required, Martha said with meaning. Just a willingness to help complete the pattern. The social was a careful dance of alliances. Families who had lost property to Hutchins clustered together, while others dependent on the banker's goodwill kept their distance. The fragile peace was shattered when Hutchins made his way toward them, his face a mask of cordial determination. Mrs. Hartwell, he called, his voice carrying across the suddenly quieter gathering. I wanted to extend an invitation. He stopped before her with a tight smile. The territorial governor is visiting Millbrook next week. As a new resident, especially one in your delicate condition, I thought you might appreciate an introduction. The offer was a trap. An introduction would come with expectations of gratitude that would compromise her. That's very thoughtful, she replied carefully, though I'm afraid my condition makes formal socializing rather difficult. Hutchins's smile didn't reach his eyes. I understand. However, the governor is also bringing his personal physician, Dr. Ashworth. Given your remote living situation, I took the liberty of mentioning your case to him. He's agreed to examine you while he's here. A precautionary measure, you understand. Josie felt a chill of alarm. A doctor in Hutchins's pocket could easily declare her unfit, giving him an opening to challenge her control of Colt and No's contracts. I appreciate the concern, she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. But Clemens has been providing excellent care. Excellent, but limited, Hutchins countered smoothly. Dr. Ashworth trained in Vienna. Surely you wouldn't deny your child the benefit of the finest medical opinion available. Before Josie could respond, Colt appeared at her side. Mrs. Hartwell's medical decisions are her own, Mr. Hutchins. Hutchins's gaze hardened. Maddox, I see you found a new role as protector. His innuendo cast a shadow on Josie's reputation. Reverend Hayes, sensing the tension, moved to join them. Mr. Maddox has always been known for his honest labor, he said, a subtle rebuke to the banker. Hutchins's smooth facade returned. Well, I'll leave you to your socializing. Dr. Ashworth will call on you Friday at 10. The sheriff will escort him, as the location of your cabin is somewhat remote. With that parting shot, reminding Josie of her vulnerability and isolation, he walked away. That man, Dr. Clemens muttered, has elevated intimidation to an art form. What does this mean? Josie asked, a hand instinctively moving to her belly. It means Hutchins is establishing groundwork, the Reverend said grimly. A territorial physician declaring concerns about your fitness could be the first step toward removing your autonomy in legal matters. And potentially guardianship of your child once it's born, Dr. Clemens added. The implications were horrifying. She had come west to escape the constraints placed on widowed women, only to find a more insidious threat to her independence. We need to move quickly, Colt said, his voice low and urgent. Before Friday, Reverend Hayes nodded almost imperceptibly. The quilting circle awaits, Mrs. Hartwell. I believe you'll find the patterns most illuminating. The church basement was cooler than the sun-warmed yard above, its stone walls providing welcome relief from the October afternoon. When Josie descended the narrow stairs, Colt close behind her, she found not the small gathering she had expected, but a council of war. Nearly 20 people were assembled around a large table. Martha and Henry Keene, the elderly Olson couple, the widowed Mrs. Patterson, and several other families Josie recognized from town. Dr. Clemens was already present, and a young man with an earnest face she presumed was Deputy Wilson slipped in shortly after they arrived, carefully locking the door behind him. Welcome to the quilting circle, Martha Keene said with a grim smile. Though as you can see, we're stitching together something other than fabric. The table was covered not with quilt squares, but with documents, loan agreements, property deeds, bank statements, and surveyor's maps, all relating to Hutchins's activities. Everyone here has lost something to Silas Hutchins, Martha continued, her voice firm. Land, livelihoods, family members. We're not just here to share sorrows. We're here to build a case. Colt stepped forward, placing the documents Dr. Clemens had given him on the table. My wife, Sarah, may have documented some of Hutchins's practices before she died. He began, but was interrupted by a knock at the basement door. Deputy Wilson opened it to reveal a nervous-looking man in work clothes. Pete Malloy, Colt said, recognizing the man who did odd jobs around town. Decent man. Pete entered, carrying a small wooden box. Sorry to intrude, he said, looking uncomfortable. Hutchins had me clearing out the old warehouse behind the bank. Told me to burn what was left of the Maddox's personal effects. But I couldn't do it. He set the box on the table. These are Sarah's things, our personal belongings from the ranch, Colt said, his voice thick with emotion. Noah, who had been sitting quietly beside his father, broke away and climbed onto a chair, making his way unerringly to the box. He opened it and removed something wrapped in oilcloth, clutching it to his chest with obvious relief. Sarah's Bible, Colt explained, watching his son. It was her mother's before her. Pete reached into his coat and pulled out a leather portfolio. Found these mixed in with her things, he said, handing it to Colt. Thought they might be important. Colt took the portfolio with trembling hands. Inside were his original mortgage papers. As he read, his expression changed from confusion to disbelief to controlled rage. "The real ones," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Look at this." He pointed to a figure on one document. The amount I owed was less than half what Hutchins claimed. "And this is a receipt for a payment that should have brought my account current. Dated 3 weeks before the foreclosure." "He forged new papers," Josie said, the words coming out like a curse. "The whole thing was fraud." Noah tugged on Josie's sleeve, offering her the oilcloth package he'd retrieved. Inside was not just the Bible, but a small journal. The pages were filled with Sarah's neat handwriting. "Mama's secret book," Noah whispered. "She said to keep it safe until we found the angel." He looked directly at Josie. "You, the baby lady." Colt took the journal with reverent hands, opening it to the first page. "April 15th, 1873, he read aloud, his voice strained. "I am starting this record because I feel something is not right with the bank's handling of our loan. Colt is too busy with the ranch to notice the discrepancies, but the payment we made last month is not reflected in this month's statement." The cabin fell silent, the only sound Colt's voice as he read his late wife's words. The journal documented her growing suspicions, her careful tracking of payments, and eventually, her direct confrontation with the banker. "June 10th, 1873, Colt continued, his voice growing tighter. "Hutchins came to the ranch today while Colt was working the north pasture. He offered to forgive our entire debt if I would sign papers transferring the mineral rights to a corporation he represents. When I refused, he became angry, saying I should consider the consequences for Noah's future. The entries grew more concerned as Sarah's health declined and the bank's pressure increased. The final entry, dated just days before her death, was the most chilling. I fear I will not see the truth revealed in my lifetime. My strength fails daily, and Colt is consumed with grief already. I cannot burden him further, but I have hidden this journal and the evidence I've gathered where only those who truly love me would think to look. Judge Franklin has promised to review our case next month. I pray he lives to do so." The room was silent except for the sound of Noah's quiet sniffling. "She knew," Colt said, staring at the journal. "All those months when I thought she was just resting, she was fighting. She was protecting us." Deputy Wilson leaned forward, his young face serious. "Franklin was investigating the bank before he died. Sheriff Morrison claimed it was routine, but the judge had requested special access to records going back 3 years. The same time frame when Hutchins began aggressively foreclosing on properties," Dr. Clemens noted. Martha Keene unfolded a large map and spread it across the table. "This is what I found in Hutchins's office last month. It's a survey map from the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. The map revealed what they had suspected. Every property Hutchins had seized lay along the proposed railroad route or within a shaded area marked acquisition priority. But that's not all," Martha continued, overlaying a second, more detailed map. "This one I found hidden in a false bottom drawer. It shows something even more valuable." The map was marked with geological notations, gold veins, deep in the earth. So Hutchins isn't just stealing land for the railroad, Josie realized. He's stealing it for his silent partner's mining interests. Noah, who had been listening with an intensity beyond his years, suddenly spoke up. "Mama knew," he said clearly. "She found a funny rock in the creek last spring. Showed it to the man who came to fix our pump. He got real excited, asked where it came from. Next week, Hutchins came with the new papers. 'The man who fixed your pump,' Deputy Wilson asked gently. 'Was it Jim Morrison, the sheriff's brother?' Noah nodded. 'He works for the train people now, in Denver.' The connection was damning. The sheriff's brother had likely identified gold on the Maddox property, reported it to Hutchins, and was now working for the very railroad company poised to benefit from the fraud. "This goes beyond local corruption," Reverend Hayes said gravely. "If the territorial governor is involved, then we need federal intervention." "But how do we get this evidence to federal authorities?" Carlos Martinez, a rancher who'd lost his land 2 years prior, spoke for the first time. "The sheriff controls the telegraph office. The mail is unreliable, and none of us can leave without drawing Hutchins's attention." A heavy silence fell over the gathering. "There is a way," Deputy Wilson said finally. "The railroad survey team is still in town, staying at Murphy's Hotel. One of them, a man named Marcus Webb, strikes me as unusual. He asks too many questions about local governance, banking practices, almost as if he's investigating more than just land routes. A federal man? Dr. Clemens mused. Undercover. It was a dangerous gamble. If Webb was part of the conspiracy, revealing their evidence would be a death sentence. We need to approach him, Josie said, a new resolve in her voice. It's the only chance we have. I can arrange a meeting, Deputy Wilson offered. As part of my official duties, I could request his assistance clarifying property boundaries. Tomorrow afternoon. That would give you, Mrs. Hartwell, as the holder of Maddox's contract, a legitimate reason to be present. The plan was risky but sound. As the meeting concluded and plans were finalized, Noah tugged at Josie's sleeve. Baby is moving, he said, placing a small hand on her rounded belly. Baby knows we're fighting the bad man. The simple statement, delivered with a child's unwavering conviction, brought unexpected tears to Josie's eyes. Yes, she agreed softly. This little one will be born into a world where people stand up to bad men. I promise you that, Noah. The journey to town seemed interminable. A physical storm was brewing over Millbrook, its dark clouds gathering on the horizon like a bruise, the rising wind carrying the scent of rain and unsettled dust. It mirrored the tempest in Josie's own heart. Deputy Wilson had arranged for them to use his personal wagon, a less conspicuous vehicle than Pete Malloy's cart, and had ridden ahead to ensure their path was clear. Colt drove, his hands steady on the reins, his posture a silent promise of protection. Josie sat beside him, the precious portfolio containing Sarah's journal and the mortgage documents clutched in her lap. In the back, Noah was a small, still figure, his wooden horse held tightly to his chest. As the cart rounded the final bend in the road, Colt suddenly tensed, his hand going to Noah's shoulder. Someone's been here, he said quietly, nodding toward their cabin. Josie saw it too. The door stood slightly ajar, though she was certain she had latched it securely before they left. Fresh horse tracks marked the yard, and the garden gate hung open. Hutchkins, she whispered, a violation of their small sanctuary chilling her more than the wind. They didn't have time to investigate. Their meeting with Webb was in less than an hour, and their only hope lay in reaching him before Hutchkins realized his search of their cabin had been fruitless. Murphy's Hotel stood at the far end of Millbrook's Main Street, a two-story structure that represented the town's aspirations to importance. Wilson led them through the back entrance, used primarily by service staff. The kitchen was a chaotic hub of activity, providing cover for their arrival as they slipped through to a private dining room where a man awaited them. Marcus Webb was not what Josie had expected. Rather than a rough-hewn surveyor, he was a man of middle years with the watchful eyes and careful movements of someone accustomed to observing without being observed. He wore simple clothes that wouldn't have been out of place on any working man, yet there was an unmistakable authority in his bearing. Deputy Wilson, he greeted them, rising from his seat. And you must be Mrs. Hartwell, Mr. Maddox. His gaze lingered briefly on Noah. I understand you have concerns about property disputes affecting the railroad's planned route. That's putting it mildly, Mr. Webb, Josie replied, taking the seat he offered. What we have is evidence of systematic fraud, illegal foreclosures, and possibly murder, all connected to the properties your company is seeking to acquire. If Webb was shocked by her bluntness, he didn't show it. Serious allegations, he said, his tone neutral. I assume you have documentation. Colt placed Sarah's journal and the mortgage documents on the table. This is my late wife's journal, he explained, his voice thick with emotion. She documented Silas Hutchins's threats, the alteration of our loan terms, and her suspicions about Judge Franklin's death. Webb examined the journal carefully, his expression revealing nothing as he read Sarah's detailed accounts. He then studied the maps Martha had copied, comparing them to official railroad surveys from his own portfolio. The correlation is unmistakable, he murmured, almost to himself. Every property acquired through foreclosure in the past 3 years sits atop these mineral deposits or along the optimal railroad line. It's not just about the railroad, is it? Josie asked. It's about the gold. Hutchins and his partners are creating a mining empire built on stolen land. Webb's gaze met hers, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his carefully neutral facade. You're very well informed, Mrs. Hartwell. A faint smile touched his lips, almost as if you were married to a man who studied law and believed justice should be accessible to all. Josie's breath caught. You knew Thomas? I knew of him, Webb replied. His articles on educational reform were controversial but brilliant. I have varied interests, Mrs. Hartwell. including the proper application of federal law in territories where local governance may be compromised. Understanding dawned on Josie. You're not a railroad man, are you? Webb glanced at the closed door, then reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather case. Inside was a badge. Marcus Webb, Special Investigator, United States Department of Justice. I've been investigating Hutchins for 6 months. The railroad survey provided the perfect cover. A wave of relief so profound it made Josie dizzy crashed over her. They hadn't needed to convince him. He was already their ally. Then you can help us, Colt said urgently. Hutchins is moving to silence us. He's brought in a territorial physician to declare Josie unfit. He searched our cabin today. That accelerates matters, Webb said, his expression growing grave. I was planning to conclude my investigation next week, but if he's already taking action against witnesses. His words were cut off by a sudden, violent crash as the dining room door was thrown open. Silas Hutchins stood in the doorway, his face a mask of triumphant fury. Behind him loomed Sheriff Morrison, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. Well, Hutchins said, his cold eyes taking in the scene. A secret meeting? How conspiratorial. He stepped into the room, Morrison following to block the only exit. I must admit, Mrs. Hartwell, I underestimated you. Webb rose slowly, positioning himself between Hutchins and Josie. This is a private meeting. Mr. Hutchins, it's a meeting about stolen property. Hutchins snarled, and I am here to reclaim what's mine. He gestured to Sarah's journal on the table. That journal, those papers, they are the property of the bank, containing confidential financial information. They contain evidence of your crimes, Josie countered, her voice trembling but defiant. Fraud, theft, and your murder of Judge Franklin. A dangerous silence filled the room. Outside, the promised storm broke. Thunder rattled the windows, and rain began to lash against the glass. Bold words from a hysterical woman on the verge of childbirth, Hutchins sneered. Sheriff, it appears Mrs. Hartwell is suffering from delusions. I believe for her own safety and that of her unborn child, she should be taken into protective custody until Dr. Ashworth can conduct his examination. Sheriff Morrison took a step forward, his hand now gripping his pistol. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. You'll do no such thing, Webb said, his voice ringing with an authority that momentarily stopped the sheriff in his tracks. This woman is a federal witness under my protection. Hutchins laughed, a cold, humorless sound. Your protection? You're a railroad surveyor. You have no authority here. That's where you're wrong, Webb began, but Hutchins was done with words. Arrest them all, Sheriff, he commanded. This man for interfering with a lawful investigation. Maddox for his outstanding debts. And the woman for theft and slander. We'll sort it out later. As Morrison drew his pistol, Colt moved instinctively in front of Josie, shielding her with his body. The room felt impossibly small, the air thick with menace. Josie's hand went to her belly, a primal fear for her unborn child overwhelming everything else. It was then that Noah, who had been a silent, terrified shadow behind his father, found his voice. He stepped out from behind Colt, his small body trembling, but his eyes blazing with a fire none of them had ever seen. He held a wooden horse before him like a shield. You hurt my mama, he said, his voice clear and ringing, shattering the tense standoff. You made her cry. You pushed the judge off the cliff. Every eye in the room swiveled to the small boy. Hutchins's face, which had been a mask of confident rage, contorted with shock and fury. Shut up, he shouted, his composure disintegrating completely. The ravings of a disturbed child mean nothing. But Noah did not shrink back. He took another step forward, his gaze locked on the banker, his voice gaining strength. She saw you, he declared, his words cutting through the roar of the storm outside. On Lookout Ridge, you yelled at the judge, and then you pushed him. The horse told me. Mama told me. She saw you. The standoff held, frozen in the electric moment following Noah's accusation. Hutchins's face was a mottled canvas of disbelief and fury. Outside, the storm raged, a physical manifestation of the chaos that had broken loose in the small hotel dining room. Then why are you so afraid of a wooden toy? Webb asked quietly, his voice cutting through the tension. He nodded toward Hutchins's hands, which had begun to tremble visibly. Hutchins lunged, not for Webb or Colt, but for the boy. Get that brat out of here, he roared, his control completely shattered. Colt intercepted him with a speed born of pure paternal instinct, shoving the larger man back. Sheriff Morrison, unnerved by the turn of events and Noah's unwavering certainty, hesitated, his pistol no longer aimed with conviction. In that moment of chaos, Noah evaded his father's protective reach and ran, not away, but straight to Josie. He pressed the wooden horse into her hands, his eyes wide with an urgent, almost spiritual intensity. "Mama's secret is in his heart," Noah whispered, his voice clear and resonant despite the thunder outside. "She said you would know what to do." Hutchins, recovering his balance, saw the exchange and lunged again, a desperate animal trying to retrieve its kill. "Give me that!" But Webb was faster, blocking his path. As the two men struggled, all eyes turned to the wooden horse in Josie's hands. His heart, with trembling fingers, she examined the carving more closely. Her thumb traced the smooth, worn wood of the horse's chest and found it, a nearly invisible seam, perfectly integrated into the carved lines of the animal's powerful muscles. She pressed gently. A small, heart-shaped section of the carving clicked open, revealing a tiny, hollowed-out compartment. Inside, nestled in a bed of dried flower petals, was a tightly folded piece of oilskin-wrapped paper. "No!" Hutchins bellowed, throwing Webb aside. He scrambled toward Josie, but it was too late. Webb carefully took the paper from her, his face grim. He unfolded it to reveal a letter written in Sarah Maddox's distinctive, elegant hand, addressed to the authorities concerned with justice and dated 3 days before her death. "I, Sarah Elizabeth Maddox, being of sound mind though failing body," Webb read aloud, his voice carrying over the storm's fury, "hereby testify that on April 12, 1873, I witnessed Silas Hutchins push Judge William Franklin from Lookout Ridge during a heated argument. The judge had visited our ranch that morning to discuss irregularities he had found in banking records concerning our mortgage. I observed their later encounter while gathering herbs on the ridge, staying hidden when I sensed the danger. I have lived with this knowledge, fearing for my family's safety. Now, as death approaches, I entrust this testimony to whoever finds my son's wooden horse, praying it reaches those who can bring justice to our community." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the increasing fury of the storm and Hutchins's ragged breathing. "Lies," he finally managed, though his voice had lost all conviction. "Delusions of a dying woman. The ridge where Judge Franklin fell has distinctive vegetation," Webb noted calmly. "Herbs that a knowledgeable woman might indeed harvest. I'm sure the federal marshals would be interested in examining the scene with this new information." Sheriff Morrison lowered his gun slowly, the realization of his precarious position finally dawning. "Silas, if this is true—" "It's not," Hutchins snapped. "And even if it were, who would take the word of a dead woman and her mute brat over mine? I built this town. I control—" "Not anymore." A new voice came from the doorway. Deputy Wilson stood there, flanked by Dr. Clemens and Reverend Hayes. Behind them, Josie could see Martha Keene, the Martinezes, and several other families from the quilting circle, their faces set with grim determination. "The federal marshals have the bank records," Wilson continued, his eyes fixed on Hutchins. "The real ones from the locked cabinet in your office. Martha had a key made months ago, and they have sworn statements from 17 families about falsified loans, forged documents, and threats," Dr. Clemens added. It was over. The web of deceit Hutchins had so carefully woven for years had unraveled in a matter of minutes. For a moment, it seemed he might still attempt to bluff his way out. Then, with frightening suddenness, he lunged toward Josie, pulling a small derringer from his coat pocket. "If I'm finished, so are you," he snarled, aiming the weapon at her swollen belly. No witnesses, no testimony. Several things happened at once. Noah screamed and threw himself in front of Josie. Morrison shouted a warning. Webb moved to intercept, and Colt launched himself across the room with desperate speed. The derringer fired, the crack deafening in the confined space. Josie felt Noah's small body jerk against her, heard Colt's anguished cry, and saw Webb tackle Hutchins to the floor. "Noah!" Josie fell to her knees beside the boy who had collapsed against her. Blood was spreading across his small shirt. "No, please God, no." Colt was beside them in an instant, gathering Noah into his arms, his face ashen with terror. "Son, Noah, look at me." Noah's eyes fluttered open, dazed but conscious. "Did I save the baby?" he whispered, his gaze finding Josie's. Mama said I had to save the baby. Dr. Clemens pushed through the stunned onlookers, his medical bag already open. Let me see him, he commanded gently, moving no shirt aside. He probed the wound carefully, a deep graze across his shoulder, bleeding profusely, but not life-threatening. He'll be all right, the doctor assured them. The bullet didn't penetrate deeply. He needs stitches and rest, but he'll recover. Relief crashed over Josie in a dizzying wave, followed immediately by a different kind of pain, sharp and insistent, radiating from her lower back. The stress, the fear, the violent climax of the day had taken their toll. Her water broke in a sudden rush. The baby, she gasped, clutching her belly as the first true contraction seized her. It's coming, now. Months later, spring breathed new life into the land. The trial of Silas Hutchins had been swift. The evidence against him, Sarah's testimony, the bank records, the statements of dozens of victims, overwhelming. He would spend the rest of his life in a federal prison. The homestead on the outskirts of Millbrook had been transformed. The cabin, once a lonely outpost of grief, now rang with the sounds of a family. A new, sturdy barn stood where the old one had been, built with lumber and labor donated by the families Hutchins had wronged. Josie stood on the porch, a healthy baby girl cradled in her arms. She had named her Sarah Hope, a tribute to the two souls who had, in their own ways, guided her to this new life. Colt came up behind her, his arms slipping around her waist in a gesture that was now as natural as breathing. The schoolhouse is almost finished, he said, nodding toward a new structure at the edge of the clearing. The Hartwell Maddox School of Opportunity. Its door would be open to all, just as Thomas had dreamed. Noah, no longer the silent boy who spoke only to a wooden horse, ran across the yard, chasing a puppy Colt had brought him. He was a different child now, talkative, quick to laugh, his eyes free from the old shadows. Look, Mama Josie, he called, holding up a wildflower for the baby to see. Josie smiled, her heart full. The path had been fraught with danger and sorrow, but it had led them here. To a home built not of wood and nails, but of courage, trust, and the enduring power of a mother's love. Colt leaned down and kissed her. Then the baby, "Are you happy?" he asked softly. Josie looked at the schoolhouse, at Noah playing in the sun-drenched yard, at the man beside her, and at the child in her arms. More than I ever thought possible, she said. On a small shelf inside the cabin, the wooden horse stood in a place of honor. Its secret compartment was empty now, its purpose fulfilled. Yet, it remained their most treasured possession, a reminder that sometimes the greatest truths are carried in the smallest vessels, and that even in the darkest of storms, a brave heart can hold a message of hope.